So obviously now you're working with some big names like Hinge, Reddit, Gojek, right? What is the sales process like to be able to get these big brands to work with you?
Um, this is where the luck played a little bit, and I can tell you why I think you can find other lucks like this. I kind of look at B2B or tech products into three different buckets, non-gaming, but problem-solving ones. One is hard tech like AI, machine learning, autonomous driving. Everyone thinks it's sexy, it's hard, investors want to give you money. The second category is productivity like Salesforce, CRM, any tools like GitLab that increase your productivity. Third is what I call messy tech. It's like it's messy. People don't really want to build it, don't want to talk about it. Investors don't really think it's a category. Like think about the early days of Twilio or SendGrid. Nobody believed that was going to be a big market. Turns out everything becomes a billions of dollars in market cap, if not revenue. And messy tech is kind of creating an abstraction layer of messy stuff that's happening underneath. And chat is kind of like that. SMS is kind of like that. Email is kind of like that. Nobody really wants to do it anymore. It's not really sexy anymore. And people often neglect it. And that's also what's happening in the HR space, like Gusto when it started out or things like that. There are a lot of segments in the market, especially in accounting or HR or any other areas where engineers don't really like to dabble in. There's a ton of room for innovation there, like construction or other industries. So I think we kind of lucked out in finding a category that we felt everyone thought there's going to be super crowded. Actually, it turns out, again, there's not a lot of choices there or good enough choices there. So we built that. And then what happens if you're kind of in that category is people look things up, but there's not a lot of solutions because, again, it's very messy. Nobody really wants to do it. So ended up, we get a lot of inbound. So to this date, I think 70 to 90%, depending on the quarter, of our revenue come from inbound
Wow.
through SEO, content, thought leadership, all those things. Now we do outbounds too because we have success cases. But early days, we had no money. We didn't raise enough capital. So only thing we could do was content and SEO, which kind of worked out even to this date. So yeah, except for Reddit, which was actually an outbound because they're YC. I kind of pinged Alexis, like, hey, do you need chat? Initially, it's like, nope. And then it's like, actually, we talked about it in our previous board meeting. Here, me, CTO. It's like, no, we're going to build it. Then realize, okay, maybe we don't want to build it because it's messy. Our team had built it before in their previous jobs. They don't want to build it again because it's too messy. It's like, great, messy tech. So that's kind of how we won Reddit, long story short. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's
But
that's how
what would
it
your
goes.
advice be for someone who's not in messy tech and is trying to capture these big companies? Because that's the biggest thing I see a lot of people like get scared about, right? They're like, oh, I don't know, it's a process, it's a long process, it has to go through all the politics and stuff like that when you go into a big company.
Yeah, I think if you say long process, we can obviously divide and conquer, right? And also depends on the customer segment. If you're selling to SMB, of course that's not true. If you're selling to mid-market, most of the time it's not true. If you're selling to enterprise, that's probably is true. But what you're really unpacking is the value proposition. The usually big companies take longer sales cycles. Yes, that's sure. But of course, there's procurement layer, legal layer, compliance layer. So there are some other components. You can run those processes in parallel. You don't have to run everything in serial. You can say, hey, why don't we start a separate thread around legal? Why don't we start a separate thread around security checks? And then once you get to compliances like ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, things like that, those security processes get shortened. Legal, if you have a standard docs, if you have some level of experience, you can also shorten that a little bit. So there are ways to run process in parallel to shorten the sales cycle for if you're selling to enterprise. But if you're starting something new, you don't have to start with enterprise unless you have worked in company that previously sell to enterprises. You can start with a product-led growth, sell to SMBs and mid-market, and really build a fantastic user experience, and then really build a bottom-up adoption. Bottom-up sales cycle, bottom-up adoption is the new hot thing. Actually, it's not the new hot thing. It's just being recognized as a new hot thing, but it's always been there among developers. So I think really building a good experience, kind of like consumer, like in that way, but you can actually talk to customers and get them to try it, and then get them to pay for it by jumping on a call. So ultimately, to sum it up, I think YC mantra is a really good and true one is talk to customer and build product, do nothing else. Especially true for B2B. If you talk to customer, they'll engage with you. If they're engaged and if you actually solve their problem, they're happy to work with you because you just made their life easier. Why
Yep.
wouldn't they want to